don't worry, because today we're going to talk and Drew is going to share on labor. So pretty excited about that. We've been talking about lately on Coffee Experts Club, just knowing your metrics, being aware of metrics. Ben talked about COGS last week. We talked about the numbers you should be looking at, what things from a perspective of buying and how you're considering selling, and just identifying where the gaps are that you can make money by saving money. And Drew has spent a lot of time managing schedules, has suffered some pretty severe critique under former leadership levels at managing schedules. And I thought that, man, there's nobody better to talk to than somebody that's had to run a mean schedule and has had to get good at it. So Drew, I'm excited to have you share with us today.
Thanks. I wore my coffee shirt.
Look at that. And Sisha's joining the video.
Oh, yeah, I got my labor dog.
There she is.
Let me talk about labor.
Right. That's Sisha makes everything better.
Yeah, anyway, she definitely helps.
Any starting thoughts you want to start us off on? Or I know you're going to be sharing some sheets, and you don't have to have any. Or Ben, we're going to put a lot of focus on Drew. Maybe let Ben kick off, and then Drew can jump in. How about that, Drew? I don't put all the pressure on you.
Okay. That's how diamonds are made.
That's it. There are plenty of diamonds are going to be made out of you today, son. Don't you worry.
I would say labor is obviously it's kind of what we've been talking about in the subject of the last couple of weeks on what you can control and what your managers and your people can control. The last week being cost of goods, obviously what they're ordering, how much they're spending on their product, but labor is a big one too. And it's just as much as COGS and ordering dry goods, it can easily get out of hand if you don't have good eyes in your shop, a good manager or scheduling. So I would say Drew is definitely the one to take us away on that front.
Oh, it's going to be good. I'm excited about it. I think that's a great kickoff. I do think, we're going to show you back into another tool that we're going to look at the same tool that Ben had showed us a little bit of last week. And it is going to be the tool that we give you for free next month with Coffee Experts Club called the Incentive Matrix. But I think that the reason the incentive matrix is built the way it was because there are only really a few controls that your managers can control in helping you save money. There's only a few controls that you can control. Obviously, as you start a lease, you've got some control there, but once you're in a lease, you're in a lease. As that thing escalates, there's not much you can do about that. Like there are utilities. I mean, you can have people turn off the air conditioning when it's hot, and you can have them turn down the heater when it's cold, but there's really not much else. You turn off the lights when you're not there, but it's hard to control a lot of the moving pieces. Taxes, like you pay a certain amount of taxes depending on what state you're in, depending on what tax bracket you fit. But I think that the tools we're giving you right now, especially within the incentive matrix, especially with COGS and then now into pay, I think is something that you control the sticks. Like you control the sticks on how much labor you're going to push at this thing. You control the sticks on who you're buying from and what kinds of things you're buying and what you're offering your people, and then what your price points are as you evaluate menu price and cost. So I think I'm excited about this because this is us giving business owners and coffee shop owners and people managing coffee shops the ability to control their profitability by understanding how much they should be working their people according to matrices. So that's not a shameless plug for Matrix. Although, how many of you have seen the new Matrix? Did Keanu make Ryan? I know Keanu's like your favorite. So you bet. Did you see the new one? Okay, Ryan, we're going on a date when I get home. That's how that's working.
It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Don't waste your time.
Come on, man. Don't be like that. Don't abide by the system. Okay, Drew, I'll let you take it away and introduce some good stuff.
All right. So I've been in coffee a lot of years now, and it seems like the problems, at least in the last decade, don't often change within the shop. You're dealing with the same problems logistically and the same problems on the ground. And the solution has not necessarily changed either. A lot of repetition, a lot of communication, a lot of holding people accountable. Those are the best ways to control these types of costs. And like Aaron said, these sheets that we're sharing, the cost of goods, the matrix, it's mostly controllable costs. It's methods and techniques that your managers who do control, the sticks on the front lines, that they'll use, that they can use, and that they need to use in order to make sure that the bottom line is as good as we can get it. So up front, one of the most important things, at least to me, is having foresight for your labor. So creating some sort of consistent hierarchy of pay and wage raises and who's making what at what level and why they're making that. Something that we dealt with because we started out obviously as a smaller level coffee shop. Something we dealt with was arbitrary pay scale, arbitrary based on who was in a good mood, what day they were in a good mood, and what kind deed that the person who got the raise had done that week, which is nice. It's nice when you're on the end of receiving the pay raise.
I know what I just realized, Ben, because we've talked about this whole topic over and over, and I just realized, wasn't Drew the highest paid manager within Roasters? And wasn't it like grossly out of line with anybody else? Because you and I would have these conversations about what the hell's going on with Richland. And it was like, well, like Wes wanted to give him a raise. And so Drew was so far out of the range. I'm like, how did the guy finagle that? But anyway,
on a regular basis, I'll be like, why is Drew making this much?
Talking about it. I love it. Go ahead.
Well, in order to prevent something like that happening in the future, lay the ground rules, I think, ahead of time. And something that we were talking about today on our L10 was to pay attention exactly to what you're giving people raises and how you're giving raises, because you do have to raise your prices with inflation, of course, too. And so you want to stay ahead of those types of costs. So establishing a ground floor, and I'll actually share a sheet. Establishing a ground floor for who's making what and why they're making that, I think, is incredibly healthy first step, because then it prevents, obviously, the ires of favoritism, and then people talking about it in years later in meetings and you finding out about
on large scale meetings where you get thrown under the bus and didn't realize they had talked trash about you for all those years when they were in the meeting with you.
Exactly. It's just good practice, I think. And then it obviously gives you the hierarchy to make those types of decisions based off of performance rather than based off of, like I said, the good deeds that I'd done in that week and whether or not I had FaceTime with whoever was in charge of my raises. So this is kind of something that we've come up with over the years, that we use just as a base level, like a foundation, and a good way to track based off of metrics of who's making what and why they're making those wages. So it kind of obviously starts with store managers, and why they make the raises, assistants down to baristas. In this, we don't have necessarily like a mid-shift lead. Obviously, the motivation behind being a lead or being a leader is going to change from person to person, and money is a good motivator. But as we found, and I think we discussed on these calls, is these generations that we're working with these days, they're not necessarily just motivated by money. Money is obviously part of it, but there's other things they're looking for, like inclusion and being a part of a story and doing something that they find meaningful. So that's not something that we include on here. But yeah, it's a good place to start, and it does also tee you up for something like doing reviews consistently, performance reviews, because this whole, when you create a sheet and create a policy that is revolving around you, you have to hold yourself accountable to do these types of things to make sure that the business stays structured, instead of working backwards like we've talked about in the past. Finding out ways to kind of level everybody out who, this person's making this much, this person's making this much, and they've been here different amounts of time. And why is this person making this much? It's not based off of anything. It levels the playing field, and it gives people a nice roadmap to follow, which I think is important. For me, it was always, okay, what can I do? What can I do next? Other than, the arbitrary good deeds. What can I do next to at least raise my pay, which was awesome, but also to learn more, which was a motivator for me, which is kind of, I think, why we don't have mid-shift leads here, is because we were pouring into them. Feeding them knowledge was a big part of that role, as well as the, you're next in line for that assistant position. So we're teaming them up as well for their duties. Aaron, I mean, we have obviously things like 3% increases and 2% increases.
Yeah.
Those are just based off of what we found as we were raising our prices over the year.
I think some of that had to do with the way that payroll was going up too, right, Ben? Like we had kind of factored that in based on how there were things that were growing within payroll constraints. As somebody gets, as minimum wage rises, it lifts all ships. I mean, like everybody, you can't necessarily start paying a barista something that's so close to an assistant and then wonder why they don't want to perform as well. Or like, why would they want more duties? I mean, if they're not going to be recognized as anything different, really, you know? And so I think that that was my rule of thought. I think, Ben, would you have anything to contribute to that?
Yeah, and this was we when we put this together, it was in accordance with what was going on in Washington at the time too, where we were doing basically a minimum wage was increasing every year. So I was like, or how do we, you know, we obviously have to increase minimum wage, which brings everything up, but then how do you also give raises so it feels like people never really got a raise for the last 5 years just because minimum wage has gone up, but they do actually feel like they're earning something. And I think the percentages were kind of what we felt like we could swallow the minimum wage increase and still be able to give raises to people on top of that.
And then as far as Drew, just as far as this document goes, because you're very familiar with it, Ben and I are very familiar with it, but just for the sake of the people here, different tiers of management based upon size of store. And they started it at different rates because of the store they were at. And that qualified for both managers and assistant managers, but baristas are baristas, no matter what store they work at, they start with the same base and they have a cap that they can make up to. Is that kind of how the breakdown goes? Is baristas have up to a cap, assistants have up to a cap. And then did we say with managers, there was no cap on management, or how did that all play out?
No manager cap.
No manager cap.
Yeah, so it was based off of obviously the sales that we have listed here, the gross annual sales. And the reason that obviously baristas don't make any more is because, say a business, say our tier one, they're doing a lot of sales. That manager has extra baristas, extra responsibilities. And so then the baristas also have more help. If you think of it that way, this barista coming into a team of 15 people is going to be more supported in that sense than a barista coming into a team of 7 or 8 people. So they're going to make the same amount because it does level out to the same amount of duties because you have twice as many people on a shift doing the same exact duties. But yeah, I mean, we do have caps for certain roles, but no caps for managers.
That's good. Any other questions while we're on this sheet? Because I know, Drew, you're going to bounce away from this sheet, yeah?
Yep.
Does anybody have any other questions on this sheet or any thoughts that you wanted to bring up or talk about? Tosh?
How was the feedback on, because obviously you guys ruled this out, right? This wasn't always established. How was the feedback coming from the teams and the leaders when this was ruled out? Was it looked at negatively? Were they excited about it?
It's a good question.
I'd like to think they were excited about it.
Ben, you probably heard the most complaint. Like, what were your thoughts?
I mean, I got great news because everyone was like, "Oh, we actually know how we're gonna get raises." So it was like it gave people like a path instead of just arbitrary raises like Drew was talking about. Like there was raise systems set up for baristas and they know their reviews and everything like that, but it wasn't communicated well. It was sort of like that foggy, like I think in 6 months I might get a raise, but you don't really know how much or what can I expecting a year from now. From what I heard, it was received well.
Yeah, I think it was received well too. And we actually got to the point of baristas being like, hey, my 6 months is coming up. When we sit down for my review, because they were looking forward to it. And then they knew that they were getting reviewed based off of their performance. So it actually, up their skill within the store, up their attentiveness. And they knew that they were being reviewed. So they knew they were being watched, but we were paying attention. And then, of course, we could discuss the reviews with them too of constructive criticism. And it was received well. People were excited. They were excited to see exactly what was coming and how they were going to get there.
And I think too, like the people that are on the top end of the range, I think it's good for people to realize when they're on the top end of the range, even of, I need to grow if I want to grow, like I need to level up if I want to level up. Like, I think it's good because it shows people, oh, there is a trajectory, even if they're high on the trajectory, or even if they feel like, oh man, that doesn't mean I'm going to go much further. Well, unless they want to grow, unless they want to develop. And if they don't want to develop, then that probably raises some other questions, right? I know that there were a couple of guys that were just lifetimers in a couple of the businesses that we've helped and come alongside of. And you're like once they start getting to a certain age, it's better if you age them out. You know what I mean? Once they realize they're not going to go any further than this, or unless they level up and then they just change. And that's not a bad thing. I know we had to come to terms with it at some point of realizing this isn't a career for everybody, and we can't create a career path for everyone. Like, this is an opportunity for them to make money as long as they're content with this amount of money. But it's also got a stopping point, realizing that there's only so many assistants, there are only so many managers, there's only so many upper management regionals. Like, so unless you want to really fight for it, Like we're not just going to keep moving you up for seniority base.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was good. That was our experience, at least, Tosh.
And we had a lot of very, very skilled and passionate baristas who just liked being baristas too. So that was kind of nice too.
And I think that's a great point too to think about is like we had some people that would escalate up and realize that's they didn't want to manage people.
Yeah.
They just enjoyed making coffee and making tips. And so they de-escalated themselves back down, and they were a lot happier and we were a lot happier because they just weren't built for it. That's not what they were built for, so.
That's right. And that, goes back to the whole motivation. Money is not the motivator for you put somebody in a management position and you say, hey, this is what you're going to make now. And you have to do all these things. It's not necessarily going to motivate them to learn and passionately do those things they have to do.
Yeah, it's good.
So, at least have a vision, of where you're going and why you're going. And so it gives you a footpath of how you're going to get there. Stop share. So then I want to talk about your sweet spot of exactly what that looks like for what your labor is going to look like. We always sat in a 18 to 22%, roughly, give or take a percentage here or there, depending on a lot of factors. Let me pull up the matrix.
Ben, I beat you. If you have any questions as we are going over stuff and you want things addressed at the end, the Slido link is in the chat.
Okay. So we always sat in the 18 to 22%. We found, based off of experience mostly, we found that was probably the healthiest point. If we were sitting too far under a certain percentage or too far over a certain percentage, we either were understaffed or overstaffed. But there's a lot of factors that go into it, such as ticket sales and items you're selling. So obviously, if you have higher ticket sales on a regular basis, you're going to have to adjust your type of staffing. If you're selling a lot of, say, food-based products, which are higher ticket sales in general, your staffing is going to be a little bit different. So the amount of items you are selling and the types of items you're selling obviously go into this thing of labor percentage. And we married these two because it was nice to see them together. That way we're not caught off guard, by payroll taxes, and our percentage is a little bit different. So that if you look at this store is a little bit high, and these stores are most of the stores I think did pretty good on this month. Was this a January? Is that what we were talking about?
Yeah.
The January spreadsheet. So some of these stores did absolutely fantastic. Some stores, on the other hand, kind of blew themselves out as far as labor goes. And one thing we noticed over time is that there is a point where your store has X amount of business and traffic to keep supporting with a certain amount of labor. So in the real slow times, at least based off of the type of shops we were running, our labor was a little bit higher. But you can see that we have a store pulling in about, 98,000, and then a store pulling in about 130,000. And these managers were able to keep their labor rate pretty close. So they were all trained pretty well to manage exactly that labor rate. And also we had fantastic tools. We had live labor rates. We always had them watch their cameras. I don't remember what we used at the end there, what it was called. But you could actually check on your phone and exactly see, minute to minute what your labor rate was, which was important at times, especially during the slow months, like say January. I think Corey said it in a previous meeting. It's much easier to staff down than to staff up. Call people off. You see a 30% labor rate, you're gonna think, okay, I probably have an extra barista and a half in there, which is get them out of there. That day's almost a wash. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of factors like time of the year trends that you weren't going to want to focus on because January is slower. But say like a June is going to be pretty busy. So there are a lot of things that go into this labor rate.
Right. I think too, we always, as you look at your labor rate, different people do it a different way, and different tools offer it different ways as far as what you're looking at and how you're looking at it. But I will say, like, we always try to tie tax into it just for the sake of seeing a true labor, like what is this truly costing us? And so this is pulled from a P&L. which is probably a little bit different than you might see it in, one of your scheduling softwares that's going to just show you raw hours allocated to a store and give you a percentage based on gross sales held against the raw hours of the person you're paying. But I will say it is nice when you can come up with a complete number of, this is the new, like, this is what we're watching, and this is the exact number. And it's not just a guess, or it's not even just like, we think this is pretty close, but it's actually an exact number where you see exactly what people are paying and how they're paying and how they're being paid. I think too, if I missed this, Drew, sorry, I was grabbing a link, but I think too, a lot of what we found with the incentive matrix, when you can watch things like this, when you're watching your P&L and you know what numbers you're looking for, and okay, COGS are here and labor is here, and you can watch that month over month, what you begin to see is managers falling asleep at the wheel. What you'll see is that as they're scheduling, it's so easy just to replicate your schedule. It's so easy just to copy it and not ask the hard questions of, okay, but is volume at demand the same way volume was at demand? And I think for managers, a lot of times they've got so many things going, or maybe they've tasked that down to an assistant and the assistant is making the schedules. It's so easy for them just to fall asleep at the wheel. But you can really watch. And when you're watching your numbers tight, you can call them out on that, because especially as we discussed this sheet last week too, but the different colored columns are same size stores. So the light gray are all of our drive-throughs, the darkest grays are our monsters. Those are our biggest cafes, and then the medium colored gray is kind of the medium size cafes. Everything we had were drive-through, but when you hold like store up against like store that's generating a similar gross number, like they're selling a similar amount of cups and they're making a similar amount of dollars, you can really watch labor very closely and see, okay, who's falling asleep at the wheel. Because it's not like, if you're grossing a very similar number, your labor should be adjusted accordingly. And so you can really see when schedulers have just fallen asleep at the wheel and they're not sending people home the way they should, or they're not adjusting the schedule out of the gates. And so maybe, Drew, you want to talk about a little bit, I know you manage like 7 stores at a time, and then you size down to 4 of our biggest as we began to, shake that out, but maybe speak into that a little bit.
All a big scheduling blur, bro.
Yeah. Right.
So as I kind of said, the more that you utilize these tools, the more you can teach your managers. The more your managers know, the better they're going to do. This is a fantastic tool to hold people accountable, because if we are looking over month, then you can go to a specific store and dial in exactly what's going on, what cost of good, where exactly is the hole, and how do we fix it? So as Aaron said, some managers do fall asleep. Something that I did as a manager was I used templates, and I think a lot of the managers did at the end there too. But there's a huge benefit and a drawback to that, which is falling asleep at the wheel and just reposting the same thing when you don't necessarily have the traffic to support it. It can be a big time saver for the managers to use templates, and I think it's efficient. And that's one of the ways, obviously, to cut back on labor, is not having managers spend 6 hours a week on scheduling, because some managers do spend a lot of time on scheduling. It's kind of a task, especially for those bigger stands. But if the managers don't consistently update those templates, then you're gonna run into things like a 30% labor rate, and that's just unacceptable. So. And it's glaring. It shows up real big in your face when you see a 21, a 22, a 19, and a 30. So when you do have them side by side, it's pretty nice, because it sheds light on exactly what you need to deal with.
That's good. Ben, what are your thoughts? I know, so Drew is at the store level. You were at like 175 employees, like watching it, and I know there was a lot of you're cleaning up punches, like as far as you're on the regionals, for the regionals to be on the managers to be able to clean up punches and make sure you get everything exacting. What are your thoughts on labor and along those lines of what Drew was talking about?
Yeah, it really is about keeping your managers informed and keeping their eyes fresh. The only drawback to this report is it's a month behind in a sense.
Yeah.
By the time you look at this, you're already 2 to 3 weeks into the next month. You go, oh crap, we should have fixed that a month ago. But as long as your managers, and if you have regional managers, you have good regional managers, they're keeping their eyes fresh, and they're keeping their focus on what's actually happening In January, it's typically a super slow month, especially if you're in a place that has snow on the ground. Like your customer base, you could lose 40% of your customer base, in a day if there's, 3 inches of snow on the ground. And in January, we're coming off the heels of December and Christmas, where it's spend, 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 and a lot of that stuff is merchandise. So it's not like sales increase dramatically in cups or traffic in December, but you're selling big ticket items. So if managers are paying attention, they see all of this giant December month and they go, okay, I'm going to translate that schedule into January, when that wasn't traffic. It was just you were selling, $50 hydro flasks.
Right.
And then 3 weeks into January, they're like, whoa, I'm way overstaffed for some reason. So it really it takes, your regionals and your managers knowing how, their traffic flows work, how the business works. And they're not going to know that unless, you are teaching them that and showing them this and going, okay, yeah, December was big back then, but look at what we sold. We sold hydro flasks and gift cards. Those things don't require more baristas to staff to get them out the window. They'll require less baristas to staff, in fact, the next month. So it's all about being able to look forward, and having people on staff to know your business well is super handy.
I think too, some of it comes back to transparency and numbers, right? We talked about that last week, how it's very easy as owners when you're starting to make, money and you start getting a little self-conscious about, well, I'm making more than I'm paying baristas, and you don't want them to see some of the numbers, but it can cause this real hidden about the numbers. But the danger with that is people are flying blind. Like you're expecting to hold them accountable to how they're ordering, how they're running their people, but you're not giving them good metrics to use. You're just getting angry with them, because that's the usual tendency, is because you're watching the numbers, you can fly off the handle and get upset about how something's being scheduled, instead of realizing, no, if they don't know, they don't know, and so really helping them and giving them the tools by saying, hey, when you show them a sheet like this and you say, and I would say, I know the way you guys coach, and Drew, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know I built this, and Ben and I, came together and brainstormed on it, and then we'd push it down to the regionals to then talk to the managers about and to coach based upon it, which is that orange color coaching tips is how we would do it. We would highlight the cell orange, drop in a comment and say, hey, Drew, this isn't a good number. You need to go in, this is a coaching opportunity. Labor's out of line, dry goods are out of line. But when it comes to seeing numbers, I think it's so key, because I think for everybody to see everybody's numbers, it creates this tension that you want, competition, right? I know Tasha is so competitive. She thrives on, our girl loves competition, you know what I mean? So it's I think a lot of store managers do, and they want the best numbers. They want the lowest labor rate. They want to know they've been staying on top of their dry goods. They want to know that they're doing better. I'll never forget some conversations I had, when a couple of the biggest stores, when Road 68 for Roaster, when Road 68 was elevating and going neck and neck with Richland, and it was between Drew, you, and Jordan there for a bit, and Jordan's like, I'm taking them down. They're going down. It was this healthy, thing, and then in the end, Road 68 did ride, after Drew left, of course, not on Drew's watch. I do think that letting people see the numbers and letting it stir up this competitive, almost gamifying it, I think is really important. Do you guys want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's really healthy. And if you don't show them numbers, then they don't know what a good rate is. They have no idea. If you don't show these managers these numbers and walk them through what you're looking for, they have no idea what they're looking for. And the competition was fun. It was a great time, because then you learn
trash talk. You just chat. It gets trash talk and pro, right? It's on one side or the other.
You learn better ways to manage. You learn, okay, how do I think I'm doing as good as I could possibly. I think I'm doing great, and then I look at my competition's numbers and I'm like, wait a second, how is their labor consistently, X amount of percent lower than mine? Okay, well, maybe I could staff my more experienced baristas in the morning, and maybe I could have those baristas get more cars through somehow. So it not only awakens within the managers who are competitive, ways to be better. But it also awakens just the drive to be better. If you don't know how to be better, then somebody pushes you, and then it's a little bit easier to find ways.
That's good. That's good. Any questions on the incentive matrix? I know we're going to look at a couple more things. Or Drew, do you have more things to show? Did you want to talk more about the incentive matrix?
I got a couple more things to show. But I could.
Well, talk about it for a little bit, and then we'll come back. So we're thinking about some good questions. You can either drop them into Slido in the chat, or we'll let you ask a couple questions if you like here.
Yeah, so I mean, there's cutting labor. There's dozens of ways to cut labor, dozens of little ways to cut back. And like Ben said, probably one of the best and first ways you should go at it is finding an extra time for your baristas when they're already on the clock. So, what are they doing that they're not making money in the store? Is there a lot of barista overlap where there doesn't need to be? Are your closers staying an extra 30 minutes when they shouldn't be? Are there extra tasks within the shop that they're spending too much time on because nobody's pushing them to be faster? So that's all money that is going into essentially just out of the hole of the side of the boat, because if you don't set a standard and hold people to it, then they don't know exactly like what numbers they're looking for. Hey, I want a 20-minute shift change. Let's try to get there. If we can't, then let's find ways to get there. And then once we get there, okay, how do we cut it down to 15 and still maintain quality? So finding pockets of extra cash within the processes that you already have is a super important part of all of this stuff. Like staffing, you are going to have higher paid baristas. You're going to want them to work the hours that are worth paying them more money, because generally those baristas who are higher paid have more skill. And the baristas who have more skill have better customer service. They have faster car times, they have better drink quality. And so if you put all of those pieces of the equation into your busy times, well, that's where you can fit more cars in. If your 6 to noon is going to be the prime time for a lot of this style of coffee. And that's where you can fit more people in. There's always more people out from 6 to noon. You can't necessarily always bump up your slow hours. You can throw deals, you can do specials. But it's like a machine that you can constantly feed if you can fit more cars through those busy times, because there's always cars on the road. Those baristas have better salesmanship, they have better on-bar management, they have better in-shop management. Those career baristas that we had, they were fast. They didn't want to be doing chores, they didn't want to be doing shift changes, so they got it done quick. And if you pair those with new baristas, well, they learn to have the tips and tricks that those old baristas had.
That's good.
I remember. Go ahead.
No, that's good. I was saying that's spitting some fire right now. That's some gold you're dropping. I love it. Good. Keep it going.
I remember bringing, like Aaron was talking about, we had somebody in leadership who just decided that it wasn't for them. So we brought them to the store that I was working at, and I learned from them. I learned barista stuff from them. Somebody who was not necessarily a great manager had a lot to teach as far as being a barista. So sticking those people in the places that they belong is paramount to, I think, the whole process of running a coffee shop. What's your analogy? Put people in the right seat of the bus?
Yeah, that's right. Butts in the right seat.
So something that we discovered here was spending extra time doing something that a vendor could do for us. And I think it kind of touched base on this was last week.
Yeah.
Your vendors essentially are going to be working for you. It's a partnership for sure. But just like our customers come to us and we serve them, we're a customer going to them, and they should be in a position to actually haggle with us and serve us exactly how we need. So if your baristas are spending time doing things in the store that is not bringing money in through the window, if you can communicate with a vendor and maybe come to terms with some sort of agreement, you're cutting costs right there too. And even if it is a couple more dollars to have a certain service put into whatever, say the vendor's stocking your milks in your fridge rather than just throwing in crates of milk onto the ground. There's a lot of things like a milkman comes in and stocks the fridge and buries a product that the managers need. Well, then there's time that the manager has to spend on burying that product, stocking it. There's little things. So lots of oversight when it comes to vendors too. And less oversight means less money spent on these processes. So I think overhauling processes and fine tuning exactly where time is being spent and why it's being spent there. And if we could make that better and spend that time and money somewhere else, we absolutely should. And expectations and communication, like I said earlier, just repeating. I remember, and this time it wasn't actually Ben, but I had somebody say, hey, when you're done with this, send me a photo. Hey, when you're done with this, send me a photo. When you're done with it, I hated hearing it. Yeah. And so eventually I would just send a photo. I would do something before I was asked and send a photo because I was so tired of getting hounded that it just created within me a habit. So it's an annoying way to do it, but man, it worked for me. So
accountability is good. Accountability is a good thing. Like it, and I think that goes along with like the whole expectation thing. Hey, we expect for like changing shifts to go like this. We expect these duties to be completed by these kinds of shifts. We expect it to look this way, and to ask some accountability on stores that have been slipping, or stores that haven't been showing up the right way. Like, I think that's just, hey, listen, we're going to call you on it. And that's not me being a jerk, and that's not me being mean. It's just that there are standards, and we know if you'll run to these standards, it helps us run lean. And if we run lean, then that's going to be more money in the company to begin to escalate people up higher and higher.
Yep. More cash means better incentives. It means more opportunity. And one of the things that I always had in my mind was, if we're not growing, we're dying slowly. If we're just stagnating, then the business is not necessarily going anywhere. And so knowing, just as an employee, knowing that the business was growing, I remember mopping the floors when I was just a closer at night and thinking, man, if this company grows, I'm going to be able to grow it so far. And it ended up growing. But I knew that it was possible. I knew that it was a goal of, a goal of the companies. So to be able to speak into those things and talk to the managers about the growth, you're feeding the fire, and those managers are going to go out and do the same thing to the baristas. Not necessarily, my manager didn't necessarily do it, but Ben traded me. It was Jimmy at the time, but I had Ben standing right beside me as I made my first iced signature drink. So he kind of helped. A good way to let's see if I have. Okay, so a good way to teach your managers scheduling, a great habit to get into, is to look at your historical data. And depending on the tools that you're using, because we use dozens of tools, we switch tools, we modify tools, we make our own tools. You're going to want to learn your tools that you're using, study them, because there's probably tips and tricks within those tools that are going to save time, and saving time is saving money. So going back year over year and finding, okay, well, these were my numbers for, January 21st. These are probably, again, my numbers this year. I could probably expect similar numbers, hopefully with a little, like a 5 to 10% increase, it would be beautiful, but that's not necessarily always how it works. So going back, using your tools that you have, I used hot schedules. I haven't in a couple of years, so I don't know what they've added. But it was nice at least to look back and see how I scheduled certain days. So teaching your managers habits like checking sales from a year before and checking the schedule from a year before. And we actually did daily updates too for the managers to talk about, okay, this was how traffic went. This is how this is when it started getting busy. This is how the customers purchased. This was a popular drink. It was all good info for the manager of the store in the next year. It wasn't always the same manager. Sometimes we had a manager manage a store for like 5 years, but it wasn't always the same manager.
Yeah.
So forecasting is super important. And this is a tool that we are using here. And it's nice because it not only tells you what your labor rate, this is a history. So I went back a couple of weeks, and this is what the labor rate ended up being, which is absolutely fantastic. But that's also based off of, we don't have managers clock in because they're on salary. So we're missing an entire barista here. Yeah. And there's also a lot of food sales, which is a fantastic place to find money. So it tells you your actuals. It tells you what your hours are that you are spending, actual hours. And then it tells you the dollar amount that you're going to be spending too. So I believe this was week over week comparisons. So it's not like year over year.
Yeah.
But it looks like they're doing fantastic compared to the week before. Yeah. And during peak times, such as when you're doing deals, gift card sales, bringing customers in, it's going to look fantastic. But you want to schedule for stuff like that too. So these tools are something that you find if you dig. They're not always advertised. They're not always even on a cheap version. You might have to upgrade your tools that you're using, but I'd say, pay an extra $4 or $5 a month, and saving hours of time for your managers and saving hours for your baristas. Oh, I got to call somebody in because it's so busy, because, you didn't spend the money to look at your labor rate and your history, or spend the time teaching people. I think that, paying a little extra up front goes a long ways on the back end.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think, and we were talking about it, is another thing I think is pretty important is using templates. So this is an example of a template that we used over here. And it's just basically setting up shifts, teeing up shifts for a certain specific day of the week. And then using that schedule, let's say for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, because traffic's going to stay similar for that amount of time. And this is what we're talking about, people falling asleep at the wheel. But if you can use these tools, it's going to save your manager hours of time scheduling. and you want to teach people. And the more that I learn about these tools that we're using here, because I mean, I learned a lot about the tools we were using back then, but as you switch and as time goes on, technology especially is growing super fast.
Yeah.
So lots of tutorials are provided. Lots of how-to videos are provided, and I would highly recommend watching anything that you have at your fingertips to learn how to save money, because there's tons of money lost in time just not using the tools that we have necessarily in front of us.
Especially if you're paying for them.
Yeah, precisely. Because generally what you're paying for is things like this. Things that tell you, okay, this is your projected sales based off of last year or based off of last week. And we didn't put a labor target in, but you know, using these tools as well, if you pair this with historical sale data and you hold it side by side, you can look at where you have overlapping shifts, which is hopefully during the busiest times or during, you know, a 10-15 minute shift change. But those are the areas that you're going to want to teach your managers to look. Okay, you know, what does your opening shift look like? When does it start getting busy? And when does it slow down? And when are there gaps? So using something like this and holding it side by side with historical data, you can make a pretty fine-tuned schedule. And generally, if you use a template, then all you have to do is fine tune that thing as you go. It's not like creating an entire new schedule every single week. It's reusing the same template and just modifying it slightly. And you can save obviously the master template, so that doesn't just get super wonky, you know, like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 edits in. You can reuse the master template and save it. And that goes into also being aware of what's going on in your area.
Yeah.
Because with labor, it's paramount to just know if you're going to have an influx of customers, if you have stands by high schools or stands by colleges or stands by community centers, being on like a local newsletter, being on anything in your area. Like if you're we had boat races, right? So we'd always get projected customers going down XYZ streets towards where the boat races are happening ahead of time. It was super important for us. And it saved us from obviously being overwhelmed and our customers being underwhelmed because we couldn't serve them. So when you staff up based off of actual events in your area, you get faster car times, which is bringing in more money through the window. And the best way to fill the drive-through is to empty it. So squeeze those hours, those busy hours with good support.
Awesome. Yeah, I would say checking with your city. I mean, most cities have parks and recs that'll send out those newsletters. Most city councils will have either an economic department or a marketing departments that'll send out those materials to you. All you have to do is say, hey, I work with XYZ business in the area. Can I get on your mailing list? And you will get spammed with every single event that's going on around you.
That's good. Corey, I'm interested in, thank you, Drew. Awesome job. And I'm going to go to Slido here in a minute. Corey, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. I know you did a lot with BlackRock for a lot of years and got to see a lot of stores and do a lot of different, schedules. What do you have like any take homes for us or wisdom that you want to drop on us?
I think that creating a schedule is an art. It really is an art because there are so many facets that go into it. You can't look at just necessarily an hourly sale, right? Because that may have been a $400 hour, but did that come at the first half of the hour or the second half of the hour? Yep. So just like both Ben and Drew alluded to, like your manager really has to understand the heartbeat and the flow of that store, because all of that factors into how you create those shifts. And then there's other parts where it's like, gosh, we only need a person for 2 hours. Well, who on earth is going to come in for 2 hours, right? So like understanding like those blocks of times and best utilizing that. So it really is an art. And this is where I think getting into the weeds of the numbers is really, really important, because the more that you understand the flow of that, the better that you can educate your manager or whoever's doing the schedule to create that efficient flow. And one thing that I worked with my manager on is I would over and over again, I would tell him, set each shift up for success. Right. So you also need to be mindful of who you're scheduling in those shifts. Right. So you're wanting to set up each shift and each set of that team for success. And obviously, from an owner's perspective, I didn't mind sharing numbers because numbers are where it's at. I mean, that's the health of the business. And the more that my management, my leadership team understood where that barometer was, the more motivated they were within that as well. And I think it was Drew that mentioned that, I mean, your greatest opportunity of growth is when you're already busy.
Yeah.
So maximizing that, that's where I felt fine spending that money. Like if I'm going to spend labor money, that's where I'm spending it. Because if that can create quicker turn times, that's okay, because then it's going to increase that $300 hour to $350, then $400, and so on and so forth. So I think that getting into the weeds of the numbers is really, really good. And if you have the right person on the right seat in that bus, and for managers, I think that a part of what you need to be looking for is somebody that's very motivated by setting up goals, and they want to beat that number. Hey, we're beating that number. So I think that's a really important element in evaluating who you put within that role, because they're going to be the ones that are motivated to make sure that each shift is set up for success, and that your newer team members, you want them to increase their efficiency. So you kind of work them in there, but just, again, it's an art. So really taking all those things into factor. And here's the other thing too. When you first start doing schedules, dude, it sucks. And it takes a really, really long time. And where that efficiency increases is when you just continue to work the schedule every week. But also, as your store matures, you start seeing that rhythm. Like in the beginning start of a brand new store, it's really hard because you're just you're figuring it out day by day, week by week. But as your store matures, there's more of a rhythm to it to kind of create an efficiency and helping that time where it took you 3 hours to build the schedule for the next week. You've now knocked that down over a period of time with all of those things.
Wow, that's good stuff. Thank you, Mr. Burkett. Always dropping the wisdom.
That was great. Yeah.